for more on the meeting between the U.S. President and British Prime Minister is James Bennett. He's a fellow at the Economic Policy Center and has written extensively on technology, culture, and society. Let's start with technology. These two leaders may be in agreement about going after terrorists, but Cameron really unhappy with some American social media companies. He even went on to say that social media sites have a social responsibility to help thwart terrorism. He wants the U.S. president to apply more pressure on these companies. Tell us how this story is playing out here in the United States and across the Atlantic in the UK.
Well, I think that there's a bit of a gap in perception, both at the high levels between the governments and at a popular level a bit lower. I think that some of the revelations about not just the governmental spying on citizens, but also the fact that the big social media companies, which tend to be American because most of this stuff developed first in America, are gathering a very large amount of data on the individuals that use the sites. Americans have been a bit more, I guess, accustomed to this in the past, but also there's been a lot of unrest in America at the extent of the intrusiveness. I think the American response at the popular level was more, let's adopt individual countermeasures. There's a wider public interest just among the computer literate about things like encryption that can be used for greater safeguards. People are starting to develop social media sites that are not centralized, much harder to gather data on, or where the ownership of the data remains with the users who generate the value rather than the corporations. These initiatives aren't as advanced in the UK. So I think in the UK, people still look a bit more towards government policy to try to cure this. At the same time, you have this countervailing pressure where the governments are looking at the cyber element of the terrorists, so the fact that the new terrorist organizations like ISIS and such use the internet extensively to recruit and in some ways to direct people and to communicate. So, Cameron's looked at trying to outlaw some of the strong encryption forms available to the general public, although ultimately Americans who are IT literate, and even British people who are IT literate, British information entrepreneurs, are pointing out that this is sort of like forbidding the tide to come in. We're beyond the point where a government can control it. But
good point there. Let me just interrupt for a second, because one of the opening remarks from the president at the beginning of this news conference was to talk about how he and Cameron wanted to grow the economies in both countries, create jobs. They both feel this year is pivotal for talks on U.S.-European Union trade agreement. Are we likely to see much movement there, do you think?
On TTIP?
Yeah.
No, frankly, I think that they're going to end up being a bit disappointed, and there's a disconnect going on because there's a growing popular unease about TTIP, even among people who are inherently pro-free trade. And I would say the majority, both the British and American publics, are very aware of the importance of free trade to their country's prosperities. We're both trading nations. But TTIP has so much structure to it, it's almost more like a managed trade system. And it's also complicated by the fact that on the European end of TTIP, it has the effect of making the European Union as a gateway into free trade with America. At the same time, of course, you're aware that Cameron has pledged to have a referendum on British membership in the European Union in 2017 if he is reelected with a full mandate. And this would cause, at the very minimum, a complete revamping of how you would approach TTIP, because if Britain left the European Union, then the logical thing to do would be to make Britain a third separate independent partner in TTIP rather than bringing it in through Europe, and its shape and its content would be very different if you were to do that.
James, let me ask you this before we go. We're just about out of time. Cameron obviously locked in a tough election that's coming up. This trip, an attempt to really bolster his standing back home. Did he get what he needed?
I believe in terms of showing that he can go in and have Obama call him bro. Yes, he absolutely got what he needed. there's a slight problem, which is that the people that are least impressed by this, the people who are tending to vote for the UK Independence Party, are least impressed by Obama. So but in terms of shoring up his base and also appealing to people who have voted Labor in the past and saying, hey, I'm a grown-up, I can handle foreign relations, people respect me, and those are all areas in which his main opponent, Ed Miliband, is in question. So it was a big plus for Cameron, no doubt about that.
All right, James, thanks so much for joining us from Colorado. Certainly appreciate your analysis.